Hello and welcome to Series 8, Episode 5 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Nikki Smith, and today I'm here with the lovely Lesley Cara. Hello, Lesley, how are you?
Hello, Nikki. I'm fine, thank you. Lovely to be back in the hot seat.
Good. In the hot seat, indeed, yes, or the grey cold seat, actually, today with snow on the way. So, in our last episode, Lauren North and I talked to Mira Shah about her debut novel, Her, that's coming out in March, and whether you should dump your day job when you get a publishing deal.
Yes, that was a really interesting discussion, wasn't it?
It was, and I think everybody has kind of different ideas on this, but I think the conclusion that came out of it was that everybody is different and it depends on the deal that you get. But it's very, very important to think very carefully about dumping your day job before you do.
Definitely, definitely. Now, then, on today's episode, we are going to be talking to Louise Swanson, also known as Louise Beech, about her latest novel, End of Story. And I, for one, cannot wait to hear her talk about it. But before we bring Louise on, I want to hear how you're getting on with your edits, Nikki, because we're both in the same boat, and Lauren is too, all three of us, aren't we? And it's quite reassuring to hear how other people are getting on or not getting on with them. So how has it been for you?
Yes, they're going okay, Lesley, and I say that with an air of trepidation. I think it's at the stage at the moment where I feel a bit like I'm playing with Jenga, and you pull out one block and everything else kind of comes falling down around you. So I don't think I'm really going to know until I get much further on how it's going, about whether I've kind of put everything back together in a different place and, muddled the pieces around. I think there could be kind of gaps and things, but yeah, ask me in a couple of weeks and I'll probably have a bit better idea. But at the moment, it's like, oh, I think they're okay. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
How about you? How's yours going?
So far, so good. I'm a bit wary of saying that though, because I don't want to jinx it. I've got the first quarter done and I'm happy with
Oh, that's
that.
good.
And I'm now in the process of slotting in a couple of new scenes in the sort of lead up to the midpoint. And moving things about a bit, because I'm trying to compress to improve the pace and things like that. And it's always a worry, isn't it, when you're moving things about and cutting things. Some things you're cutting, some things you're cutting and pasting, some things you're rewriting. And you kind of think, oh my God, what if I delete something I really need? Because I'm not doing, when you get for listeners who haven't been through this process, when you've actually completed your first sort of major structural edits and they're kind of happy with it, everything's sort of tracked, and so they know exactly what you've deleted and what you've moved here, there, and thither. But I'm not doing that at the moment. I'm just redrafting it, and then presumably the next stage, everything will be tracked. So I'm just really scared of losing something I might
Yes.
later need.
Yes, I tend to cut and paste it into a separate document kind of thing, and then you just end up with pages of stuff where you don't know where things are and things like that.
That's right. So I tend to do, I think what you do, I email it to myself at the end of each day. But it's remembering to name all the documents correctly, because otherwise you've got to go through all these hundreds of documents. Well, maybe hundreds is a slight exaggeration, although not by much, I have to say.
No, I
Yeah.
know.
And yeah, because you don't want to call everything latest draft. It has to be much. I try to date mine, version
Yeah,
one, version two, but yeah, it's it's
yeah,
it's, it's tricky. But yeah, so that's
yes,
that's what's happening so far. But
yes.
yeah, no, I don't know if there's
That's what,
anything.
yeah. I mean, I do the same thing. I email mine to myself at the end of every day, because you hear these horror stories about people switching their computer on in the morning and it's kind of a blank blue screen and it's just disappeared forever. So I think at least if mine's on Gmail, then I can always get into it, wherever I am, even if I have to use another computer.
Yeah,
Um, but it is. I just have to put them all in kind of date order. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, don't know where
that
I am.
that terrifies me actually, because
Yes.
I'm also my iMac is, I think it's about 8 years old now, and just recently it started to really slow down. And apparently they only last about 8 years or 5 to 8 years or something, and I didn't realise that. I thought they'd last longer. And I
Yeah.
have got my MacBook as well, so I've made sure that everything's on that. So, but I'm just terrified it will stop and I won't get.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I know exactly. It's like, right, okay, do it and then email it to myself. But at the moment, I think it's at that stage where, even if you lost a day, it's only a day, and in your head it's only a day. But goodness, the amount of work that you can do in a day, and
Oh
because it's
God.
all over the place as well, it's like, oh my God, I couldn't recreate that. It'd be an absolute nightmare. So, yes, we keep going, Lesley. We keep going.
We do indeed. Yeah.
Yes, so today's topic, we should probably say, is the power of storytelling, which is particularly relevant to our guest's new novel. But before we pick Louise Swanson's brain on that one, what does the topic mean to you, Lesley?
I was worried you were going to ask me that. I was Googling this earlier in the week, actually, because I thought you might ask me that. The power of storytelling. I mean, do you know, I came across this quote from someone called Lisa Crone. I don't know if you've heard of her. She wrote a book called Story Genius, I think it's called. Is it called Story Genius? I mean, it's one of many how-to books in my Kindle library. I don't know about you, but the more novels I write, the more how-to books I seem to buy. When I first started
Absolutely.
writing, I said, I don't need a how-to book. I know how to write. And now, of course, I've written 5 novels and I'm buying them all over the place. But
Yes.
anyway, so yeah, Genius is really good. And in it, she says, what grabs readers isn't beautiful writing, a rip-roaring plot or surface drama. What grabs readers is what gives those things their meaning and power, the story itself. And that really resonated with me because, we're hardwired, aren't we, as humans, to respond to stories. It's how we learn about life. So storytelling is it's in every permeates every aspect of our lives, really, doesn't it?
Absolutely, that's so true. And I suppose you can also think about storytelling like from a marketing perspective. I think that there's someone called Seth Godin, and he looks at how brand-driven storytelling is now is kind of the way to go, if you like. So there's a comment there. He said, marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but about the stories that you tell. So he's kind of talking about how we brand ourselves as authors. And it's not just the stories that we talk about in our books, but the stories that we talk about our books and about ourselves that actually help us to kind of sell our books, which I think is quite interesting as well, isn't it?
It is,
It's
yeah.
true.
Yeah,
I think
I've listened to a couple of interviews with him actually, and he's got lots of really interesting things to say about that, about the stories authors tell about themselves and about the book they're writing. Yeah,
yeah.
but I reckon we need to get Louise Swanson on because she kind of knows all about this, seeing as her book is all about the power of storytelling, and it's also set. Well, she'll tell us all about it, but it's a dystopian anti-fiction regime, so it's very very interesting, and
It is.
yeah, I can't wait to get her on. So now it's time for our short burst of applause, which always seems to end too quickly, don't you think, Nikki? It always ends
Indeed.
very abruptly. So here you go. Here's the applause for Louise. Welcome, Louise Swanson, also known as Louise Beech, to In Suspense. It's lovely to have you with us, Louise.
Oh, it's an absolute joy. I've been waiting all day to join you.
Well, we've been waiting all day for you to join us. Actually, no, we've only been waiting a couple of minutes. You're not late. Just in case our listeners think you're late or anything, you're not. You're perfectly on time. Right, so I'm going to read your bio. Louise has published 8 novels with Orenda Books. Her work has previously been longlisted for the Not the Booker and Polari Prizes and shortlisted for the Romantic Novel Awards. She also won Best Book of the Year with her 2019 psychological thriller Call Me Stargirl. Aside from being a novelist, she was a columnist for the Hull Daily Mail for 10 years. She also recently worked as the front of house for the Hull Truck Theatre. That sounds fun. Her latest novel is called End of Story, and both Nikki and I have devoured this one. And it really is such a fantastic premise for a book, Louise. It's terrifying, and yet it's also beautifully written, and it's a heart-rending read. And I'm not going to explain to our listeners what it's about because I'd balls it up for sure. So I'm going to let you do that.
Oh my word. You guys know being writers, don't you? That I think sometimes the hardest part beyond writing the books is then having to sort of talk about them to people in a way that doesn't ruin any, reveals, but hooks them. So what is the book about? Okay. It's set in a future world, 2035, where all fiction has been banned, which obviously to us and to you guys is an absolute nightmare of hell. Non-fiction books are fine, but just fiction has been banned. It's a thing that had been happening for the last 5 years. So recently there were 4 big writers called the Big Four, and these 4 women wrote books that kind of addressed some really topical things. And the government used this as an excuse, saying that this caused, riots and trolling online and lots of problems like that, when really it wasn't about that, which is obviously a little bit current, we know that. So one of the main writers is called Fern Dostoy, and she was one of the Big Four, probably the most successful. And now with the fiction ban, if she writes fiction, she could go to prison. She has regular visits from government officials to check that she's not. And she works as a hospital cleaner, lives a very, very, very solitary life. But she is recording in a diary, a handwritten diary, because she's scared to go on her laptop, what her world is now. And so therefore, the very nature of writing a diary, is she a reliable narrator? Is this a story? Is this the truth? And she's volunteered at this place called Bedtime Stories, where volunteers are reading bedtime stories on an illegal helpline to children, because the biggest loss in this book really is that children can't have fairy tales and the effects on them, which is something that was the first thing I thought of, with the idea of like, if we couldn't have fiction, can you imagine not being able to tell your children fairy tales? And I can't say much more than that without,
Yes, it's
yeah.
it's a very, very difficult book to kind of describe, isn't it, without giving away anything. But I absolutely loved it, Louise. I thought it was really thought-provoking and at times intensely chilling. And as Lesley said, very heart-rending actually as well. And obviously, without wanting to give away any plot spoilers, I thought what you've done with it is really, really clever, very, very clever. So I'd love to know what sparked the idea for it and how did it feel to write?
It was a couple of things that came together. You guys probably know that as writers, and I'm sure the writers listening out there will know what I mean, that it's not always just one idea, is it? It's a few little ones that end up being linked. So the main idea began with just me I'd always kind of wanted to write something a bit dystopian. And I thought, gosh, how do you approach that? How do you do that? I've never done that. And I said it to my husband once in one of the lockdowns. It was the last lockdown, as I call it, the really awful one where we were fed up, number 3 at the end of 2020. And I said to my husband, I really fancy writing something like that. And he said, well, why don't you then? And I just thought, he's right, why don't I? And we're kind of in this dystopian world at the minute, locked inside. So there was that. And then during that lockdown, you all probably recall, Rishi Sunak suggested to those of us in the arts, didn't he, that we just retrain, those of us who can't work in the theatre anymore, or the ballet dancers, or the musicians who can't do their jobs now, just go retrain, just go be a plumber or something instead. And so that was playing on my mind. I was thinking, how dare he, what has got through us through lockdown? Films, books, which is the arts, And so I started to think about a world maybe where there wasn't the arts, specifically fiction. So there was that as well. And the writing of the book also followed a family tragedy. I'd just written my memoir about my mum's suicide attempt. And so I was in kind of this raw, dark place. And so all these things came together and it just felt like the right moment in time. I don't know if it was very, very challenging during lockdown to write that, but yeah.
That's really, you can see all of those elements in the book as well. That's really interesting, really interesting. And you're an incredibly prolific writer, aren't you? You publish so many books, and they also span lots and lots of different genres, which is probably quite unusual, I think, for a lot of writers. End of Story is obviously published under your new name of Louise Swanson, but you also write as Louise Beech. And can you tell us what you see as the distinction between the two names? And do you know which one you're going to be writing under next?
It came about because it's a different publisher to Renda have published my first 8 books. And yes, they jumped genre, but kind of not quite as much as this one. You know, there were elements that maybe they were all contemporary, I suppose. There were elements that made them a little bit the same. And so it was with a new publisher, Hodder, and completely different. And they suggested it to me. They said, how would you feel about a different name? Just because this is so different. And I thought about it, and at first I was a bit unsure, because we all know, don't we? You work so hard, don't you, to get your platform going and get your readership. And I was a bit nervous about, would people be on board if it was another name? And then I thought, maybe if I keep my first name, and then I can keep the same Twitter account, because I'm called that Louise Writer. And I thought, if I keep the Louise, I can just have one Twitter account still, and just a surname that's different. And Swanson was just because I thought it was a bit glamorous. I just liked it.
It's very glamorous, Louise. Very glamorous. Yes.
I did want to do Monroe, but I thought that's a bit obvious. My husband did laugh and say, Louise, you can't. All right, okay. So yeah, it was that. And whether we'll be getting Louise Beech anymore, we will, with my memoir, which I know you're going to ask me about later. And it's hard to say, because I have just finished a follow-up. When I say follow-up, it's not a follow-on. It's its own book, but another Louise Swanson, because it was a 2-book deal with Hodder. So there will be more from Louise Swanson, but probably Louise Beech as well.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Now, back to End of Story. And one of the things that this novel explores so well, Louise, is the themes of grief and loss. And as you just said, you've experienced great trauma in your own life. And certainly reading through the book, particularly the ending, it certainly moved me to tears reading it. And I know that you've also, as you mentioned just now, you've explored some of your own trauma in a memoir called 18 Seconds. I think it was called Daffodils, and now it's called 18 Seconds. And that's coming out this year, isn't it, under the name Louise Beech. And I think I've heard you or seen somewhere that you've said that you couldn't have written End of Story if you hadn't first written 18 Seconds. So I wondered if you could tell us a little more about that and unpick that a little for us.
Yeah, I suppose my memoir was at that point the most difficult thing that I'd ever written. I'd kind of known I'd like to write one day, because I'd had a very difficult childhood. There was a lot of upheaval. There were parents with a lot of problems, mental health problems, alcohol problems. And I felt like there was a story there that other women, anyone might identify with, but I didn't really have an angle. And I always know with a good story, you really need a really good angle to come at it from, don't you? And then my mum jumped off the Humber Bridge in 2019. She did survive. She now is a wheelchair user. So after that happened, I know this sounds like a terrible thing to say. I just knew that is a hook to a book, as readers, isn't it? You read a first chapter and it opens with something like that happening. I would personally read on. And so I knew that was the opening, and that would begin my memoir. So I wrote it with a modern day angle of what was going on now with my mother, and then doing flashbacks. So yes, it was super difficult to write. And I began it just before COVID, weirdly, and halfway through the pandemic began to happen. And that became a third narrative where I started writing about this, curious disease, and there were people actually dying of it. And oh my gosh, what if it comes to England? And so there ended up being 3 timelines, the very now, and then the recent now, and the past. And so it was quite organic. And so, yeah, having finished that, I kind of did have this feeling that if I can write that, I can really write anything. There was an element of being sort of free and open, because, I'd literally cut myself open to write this memoir, that I was less afraid of writing something else. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. No, it really does. And I was interested to read in one of your blogs, there's a sentence that says, if you want my truth, you'll find it in my fiction. And I thought that was really interesting. And so, with that statement in mind, how was the what do you think are the key differences between writing the memoir and writing the novel? How different of an experience was that?
I suppose I get away with lying when I write novels. You know, we are tricksters, aren't we? We can tell lies, we can change our minds about what we write. You know, we find that maybe the novel goes a certain way we didn't expect. We can introduce certain characters. You know, we're kind of these gods, aren't we? We're in charge. We write this fiction. But with the memoir, because it was real, and these are real people that I have to kind of honour and give some respect to when I write it. Yeah, it was really hard. I had to sort of be very mindful, very respectful, and really sometimes analyse and think if I was telling the truth. And I don't mean that I was trying to lie. I mean, you know, I word things a certain way as a writer. And so I'd think, don't exaggerate that, or don't add that, because this isn't fiction, Louise. This is your real story. And so it was quite hard because I couldn't hide behind those flowery bits that we put in novels. You know, it was just me and the page and just my story.
But I guess even with writing a memoir, there's fictional elements at work there, isn't there? As you say, because you've got to turn it into something that readers are going to want to turn the page. It can't all be sort of just then this happened, then that happened. You know, pure facts. It's got to be woven and worded in a creative way, hasn't it?
Yeah. It has, and I did try and have not so much cliffhangers, but I did try and think that way. I tried to think like a novelist when I wrote it. So I'd think, you know, maybe I'll end this chapter at this point, because this is a good hook, because at this moment the reader's wondering, oh my word, you know, is she going to live? And I'm thinking, oh, leave it there, and then we'll begin the next day. So yes, I did try and make it story-like.
Yeah.
In and that way, and there's still lots of symbolism and metaphors in there, because I think that way anyway in real life. You know, the reason it's called Daffodils originally, the audiobook, is because of the daffodils that I saw on the morning that my mum jumped, and had I not been delayed by looking at them, I might well have walked past the bridge when she was there, and that's just blows my mind. And so that was why it ended up being called that. And that's the kind of thing, it sounds like it's made up, but it wouldn't happen, but it did. It really did.
And I think it's been nominated, hasn't it, for is it Audi's 2023? So big congratulations for that.
Thank you.
I'm very pleased.
I was like, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know it was a thing. I just got tagged in this post, and it's this big company in America, and there's an actual awards ceremony. I mean, I can't go because it's $300 for a ticket, you know, in New York. Like, I know I can't go to it, but apparently they stream it online, so the next day I'll be able to, you know, watch it. It's bizarre.
Fantastic. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, isn't that lovely? So in terms of fictional storytelling, how much of yourself do you think is in what you write?
I think even we can sit here, can't we, and say that nothing is, but I think we're lying if we say that, because we can't help, can we, but put ourselves a little bit on the page sometimes, you know, because our opinions end up in there, don't they? And the way that we see the world, it does colour it. But then I also think I include other people in my life a lot, you know. Like we joke, don't we, us writers, that if you do us a wrong, we'll kill you in a novel type thing, you know. Not that I've done that yet. Yeah.
Oh, I think there's certain elements of certain people that I'll put into books. They never recognise themselves, but it's definitely they make it in there. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. They wouldn't, if they were a negative character, they probably wouldn't. You're right. They wouldn't see it. No, that won't be me. That's too horrible to be me.
Yeah.
But you are right. We do. For example, my third book, Maria in the Moon, I always call that the memoir I couldn't write, because it's got some themes in there that came from my childhood, but I created this fictional character because it protected me from really looking at it. And so I've got a bit of affection for that book, of thinking, yeah, I finally wrote the real story of like Catherine Maria, who is the character in that book.
Yeah, no, I think there's always bits of ourselves in every character we create. I think that's inevitable in a way, isn't it?
Yeah,
particularly
now, being honest.
Yeah, and particularly in our debuts, I think, although perhaps not necessarily our published debuts, because as writers we've probably written several novels before we got a novel published. But often if I go back and look at my earlier attempts, They're very autobiographical, I can see. There's lots of me in there that I've managed to disguise now. So
Yes.
now I think you've also written a book about Marilyn Monroe, haven't you, as well? Which on social media, I think you said you wrote for yourself. And how did you find trying to write someone else's story? You know, it must be very different trying to write the life of a real person than the life of a fictional character. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I say I wrote it for myself. My agent is going to look at it, but a difficult sell. It's basically because I've loved her since I was 12. I've just been a huge fan of hers. I've I've probably got about 50 books about her. I massively just loved her since I was little. And I always am fascinated with what might have happened to her had she not died that night, because obviously she was only 36, whole life ahead of her. And she was a woman who was a lot cleverer than people think, and very sensitive, intelligent. She was actually a gorgeous writer. She wrote some gorgeous poetry. I've got a book where they actually shared some of it, and it's really lovely. And so I'm kind of haunted by what could she have been. So the book is, it starts on the night she was supposed to die, but she doesn't. Something happens where she doesn't. And so it is fiction, because it's not really about her real life, it's after that. I mean, there are elements, obviously, I stick to the truth of her real life, and I'm talking about the past, but I wrote a world for her where she walks away from the fame, and I don't want to say too much. It's a bit like end of story, really, because I don't really want to share what happens.
Oh, I hope your agent does manage to sell that.
Yeah.
That sounds really, really good. I'd be really interested to read that.
Yeah.
I feel like there is a market, because she never goes away, and there are regularly new documentaries, new books, and we're coming up to, I think, in 2026 it'll be 100 years since she was born. I'm thinking that's a nice anniversary, and it's looming in 3 years, so who knows? So
You never know. You never know. And you also wrote another novel, I think it was called Nothing Else, under Louise Beech, during the period of lockdowns. So basically, you were incredibly prolific during those lockdowns, which is amazing. And why do you think that was? Because I know many authors kind of struggled hugely, but you didn't. You seemed to use it and wrote loads.
They did, and I saw some really sad posts by a lot of authors just saying they just couldn't do it. It wasn't there, and they were trying, and I really felt sad for them. I almost wanted to give them something of what I was feeling and doing, because I just thought that would be my worst nightmare. But I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was because as a child, writing was it soothed me, and it was somewhere I went during trauma. And so what greater trauma did we all have as this mass lockdown? So I don't know if it was me behaving the way I did then, and just really needing to write. And then I had very short gaps between the books where I was like, oh, I'll start another one. I really want to start another one. And it was a way to maybe escape from the world we were going through, which was awful. Obviously, a lot of people read to escape from that. Yeah, I kind of respond to difficult times by writing, but I have to say I want some good times now.
Definitely.
We all do, don't we? We want some good times now.
Yes.
We are owed some good times, aren't we?
Yeah.
Definitely, after what we've been through. But yeah, I struggled to write, and I struggled to read in the first lockdown. But I think, as you say, as it went on and on, I did start to seek sort of refuge in my writing, and that became, I could lose myself in the words and forget all the nonsense and the horror that was going on outside. So I can understand why that was such a fertile creative period for you, definitely.
Yes, I think I just had a house full of people, and I like it quite quiet when I write. I like to get away, and it was just everybody was here, and it was just like yes.
Of course,
So,
I often thought of the ones who had children at home was different for me, because I mean, although it was heartbreaking, my children, I didn't get to see them because my daughter was at university and my son lives in Mansfield. And so I had a quiet house, so I was lucky in that regard, but then it was awful.
Yeah, but then horrible as well. Yeah.
But I saw all these poor parents who were, working in kitchens and on tables and got the kids round, and I did feel for you all. I really
Oh,
did.
it's bringing it all back. Not that I was looking after kids.
We're not going there. We're not going there again.
Not going there. No, moving back to end of story. One of the things that occurred to me, Louise, as I was reading it, was that the main character, Fern Dostoy's, her sort of secret scribbling habit, she's writing her account in her diary, and as you say, she doesn't want to be caught, so she daren't write it on her laptop. But it made me think that's how many writers approach their craft to start with. I don't know about you, but I was very secretive a writer when I first started writing. And if my husband ever came into the room, not my current husband, my last one, if he came, this one, I wouldn't mind him reading what I was writing. But if he came into the room while I was typing, I'd immediately minimise whatever I was doing, and I kind of kept it secret. And I was wondering whether that secrecy around the act of writing that you kind of explore in this novel, is that something that you experienced too when you first started, or have you always, right from the beginning, been very upfront about your ambition to be a writer?
I've always been quite upfront. If anything,
I should have guessed that answer, shouldn't I?
I don't know why I would think that. When I was little, I used to like fill exercise books with stories and chapters, and I'd have headings and draw the pictures and all of that. And so I would always tell people, I'm going to be a writer one day. I'm going to be a writer one day. And then as a teenager, I was kind of editor for the school magazine, and then I got sacked. I can't remember why. Maybe I was just obnoxious. I'm not sure. And then, so I created my own magazine, and I sold that to compete with the school magazine.
Oh, Louise, you're brilliant. We love you.
I really wasn't that obnoxious. I think I just was very ebullient when it came to the writing, if you know what I mean. I kind of wanted to be in charge of my own writing, and so so I did tell everyone, I'm going to be this writer. But what's really sad is when I was 19, well, actually, this isn't sad, it's now great, but when I was 19, I got pregnant with my son while I was doing my A-levels. And so my life was put on hold. So all these big dreams that I bragged about, I didn't get to go to university because I was a single mum. So it was very delayed. And I think a lot of people maybe thought, oh, she was shouting about that, but she's not done that, has she? But so then I suppose it was secret in a way, because I used to write these little funny articles about being a mum, which ended up forming my column. But I kept them a bit secret because I did think, oh, it's not going to happen for me. Maybe I shouldn't be shouting like, hey, I'm a writer. And but then I did come back that way. I did, because when I got my column and that ran for 10 years, that gave me the confidence to do short stories and then the novels. And then, although it was a long journey, it took a long time. Eventually I was back to being the shouty Lulu, as my husband called me. That's what he calls me.
Shouty Lulu, I love it.
Shouty Lulu, that's brilliant.
In the affectionate way. When he says that, he means I'm on one, shouty Lulu was in there, right?
Oh, that's brilliant. And on your website, Louise, you've been very honest about some of the rejections, the negative comments that you've had in the past, as have we all. So could you maybe talk about that for a moment? Because I think some of our listeners would find that really interesting, about how you deal with rejection. And I mean, let's face it, no matter who you are in this industry, you're going to get horrible comments and rejections. So yeah, any advice basically that you've got for dealing with that?
I must admit, the first time I got one, I just had a big tantrum, like we probably all do, don't we? I had a big old tantrum thinking, how dare you, da-di-da. And then when I'd calmed down and actually read it, I actually realised it wasn't a criticism. I seem to remember the rejection was because it didn't fit into any boxes, which I got a lot, being not fit in a genre. A lot of them were, we actually quite like this, but we don't know where to put you. We don't know what you are. And that's a really hard one, because obviously, you come away and you think, right, okay, I'm going to use the criticism, because sometimes for the writers who are listening, if you're given a specific criticism, it can be helpful, even though it hurts, because you can think, okay, they've said that, maybe I need to work on that. But how do you work on fitting in a box? You know what I mean? So yeah, I tried. The first ones hurt, like for most people, but in the end, it's kind of sad, really. You get immune, don't you? Because you get that many. that it came to a point where I'd click open an email and not even read the full email when it was a rejection, because I'm like, it's a rejection. No, it's a rejection, you know. And you kind of maybe use it as the fire to fuel you, and just think that you only need one yes. You can have a billion no's, but if you get one yes, you know, it changes everything, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think that's really true. It does only take one yes, and I think that initially there was that, as you say, it's the first ones that really sting, don't they? I think when I was first applying to agents, when I sent my book off, I had, I think one came back within like the first one, 25 minutes or something after I sent that email. You know, you gear yourself up for it and everything. And it was just like, no, thank you. And it was just like, oh my goodness, you know, I was crushed kind of thing. But you know, you get a lot more resilient.
I think the worst ones are the almosts, the very nearlies, you know, when you get a sort of I remember ages ago getting a really encouraging response from a sort of he was a reader for a big agency, and he really liked what I'd sent him, and he said, oh, I really like this, and I'm going to send it to such and such an agent, and this only happens, I only send about 12 through to them every year or something like that. And I thought, oh, this is it, you know. And then of course it was a rejection. They thought it was too quiet. So I sort of sulked about that for a while, and then I thought, right, I shall write a louder novel.
You'll be shouty Lesley.
Shouty Lesley,
Shouty Lesley novel. Yeah. Yes, well, that's really inspiring. Yes, I think hopefully our listeners will all take something away from that. And then finally, I think since we're fortunate enough not to live in a world where fiction has been banned, we'd love to ask you what you've been reading recently, or what you've recently finished, and anything you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yes. So I did a podcast recently with Janice, Hallett. Can you imagine how much I was fangirling? I was like, because I recently read The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels. I don't know if you guys have read that. Oh my God. I mean, it's a big fat book, you know, it's a big one, but I read it in 2 days because it was one of them where, you know, I read a bit, put it down, went to wash the pots, and I was like, oh, sod the pots. No, I'm going back to read. And it's so clever because it's written, isn't it, by interviews and emails and like even post-it notes. That's the narrative. And you if you tell someone that, they think, well, how would that work? But she does it so cleverly, using exactly the right amount of information to make you think, what's happening? Is that true? What's next? And so that was one of those books, you guys will know what I mean, where you read it and you think, I need to up my game. That's good. It's a bloody good book. And it's great.
Annoyingly good. That's what I always say. It's annoyingly good. Yes.
I like that. Annoyingly good. Yes. Yes. Well, you might have a bit of a sulk thinking, too good.
Why didn't I think of that?
Why didn't I do that? Yeah.
So that was really good. And while I was on the podcast, she recommended something to me that you guys, I don't know if you've read. So she said, do you read true crime? Now, I don't generally read true crime. I watch true crime documentaries, but not really read. So she said, read a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michele McNamara. You read it?
Brilliant. It's brilliant. Yes.
Oh, yes. My word. I think I read that even faster. I think I read that in a day, like it was Saturday.
It's a true story about a serial killer in San Francisco. Is it San Francisco? I can't remember. It's I can't remember where it's
set. California area.
Yeah. And basically it was her kind of mission to find out who this guy is. And I won't spoil it for you, Lesley, in case you want to read it. But
remind me of the title.
Brilliant.
It's
called I'll Be Gone in the Dark.
I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and it's by
Michele McNamara.
Michele McNamara. Okay, well, I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah,
it's clever because it's emotional, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're invested in her and her passion, and when I was telling my husband about it, because he quite likes true crime, when I was telling him a certain prediction she made, that's all I'll say, I actually got emotional telling him. He was like, "Are you all right? It's a true crime book, Louise." I said, "Yeah, but it's emotional because." Her passion for Yeah, and I can't say why it's emotional. I will just, yeah, it is. You'll see why when you read it. You know
Very
what I'm
good.
saying.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Yeah.
I also was lucky enough to get an advance copy of Catriona Ward's Looking Glass Sound.
Oh,
I haven't read that yet.
Oh gosh, I'm not sure when it's out. I think it's July, maybe.
Okay.
But, I mean, I'm sure you could get an early copy.
now
I
her
was very
first
sneaky.
was her first The House on Needless Street.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, brilliant. Yeah,
And I
fantastic.
loved the next one as well, actually. And I've
Yeah.
completely, the title's gone out of my head, but it set in like the desert kind of thing. It was really good, really good.
She's such a natural storyteller, isn't she? That's what it is. It's like, and she writes the most beautiful sentences, the kind where you stop and you actually read it again and like, oh wow, that's a great sentence. So this one's kind of another one that's got a story within a story, because I love writers that do that. That's all I'll say, because it's another one where I can't say much. But beautiful, but another one where it's like, who's telling the truth? What's the truth? What's the
I love
story?
that.
What's not?
Yeah.
Love books
Clever.
like that.
Okay.
And of course, I loved yours, The Beach Party. I read that recently as well. I think I read that about a month ago. I love the retro feel to that. I do love a bit of a retro, especially because we're, that's our era, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. And I'm just loving seeing all the success you had, because I remember your first one came out in lockdown, didn't it?
Did indeed, yes, and my second as well. So hopefully, we're hoping third time lucky that this one won't be in a lockdown. So yes, fingers crossed. Yes.
And yours, Lesley, it's on my radar. I must get to yours very soon, and then I can share my feedback.
There are so many books and
there
so
are,
little time.
and never enough time. Never enough time.
Yeah, because you do, don't you? You see them and you think, I must remember that, and then a minute later you've forgotten, haven't you?
Yeah,
I know. It's so difficult. Yeah.
How about you, Lesley? What have you been reading?
Well, I'm not reading a huge number
No,
of
me
books at the
neither.
moment because I'm in the middle of my edits, but I have just started this. It's not crime, it's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but I hope I pronounced this correctly. Otessa Moshfegh. I'm not quite sure if that's but it's really good. I mean, I'm just going to read you this paragraph. It's a shocking and strangely tender novel about a young woman's efforts to duck the world by embarking on an extended hibernation, which sounds lovely, doesn't it? With the help of one of the worst psychiatrists in the annals of literature and the battery of medicines she prescribes. And I'm really, I've only just started it, but it's so different from, crime novels and things. So I'm really enjoying the kind of change. I think it's important to change it up a bit, isn't it? Because we tend to read so many novels in our own genre, which is great, and I love reading them. But sometimes it's nice to get into a bit of literary fiction and just sort of, and the beauty of language as well, as you were just saying, Louise. I have been sent, I've been sent some wonderful proofs. I've got All of Us Are Broken by Fiona Cummins.
Oh, I love her.
I mean, I know it's the proof cover, only the proof cover, but it's beautiful.
It's so good, Lesley. It's really, really good.
I can't wait to get into that. And
I might be cheeky and gun. You just got to know the right people, haven't you? Where you just all you do is you put a comment on saying, "Oh, this looks good."
One came, which is, I haven't asked for this, and I don't know who it's from. It's not even in my genre, so it's very strange. I don't know whether it's a mistake. Someone sent it to me, a publicist. I don't know. It's called The War Pianist by Mandy Rowbottom, and it's a sort of a spy thriller, I think. 2 cities, 2 spies, which woman survives? But there was no note in the envelope, so I have no idea who sent it to me. Obviously, Mandy Rowbottom's publicist, unless it's been sent to the wrong person, I don't know. I just don't know. But I mean, if I can get round to reading it, I will.
A bonus one, yes.
Yeah, a bonus. I just thought, wow, I'm getting books from other genres now. Fantastic. What about you, Nikki?
Well, I'm like you, Lesley. I'm not reading that much at the moment because I'm doing my edits, but I have just read this one, which is called The Fields by Erin Young, which is it's crime, but it's more kind of, I guess, police procedural than the things that I write. So I can't really read, kind of psychological type thrillers if I'm when I'm editing and things. I find it really difficult. So but this was brilliant. It's set in Iowa, and it starts with a body in the cornfields, and really creepy, really dark, kind of Silence of the Lambsy, and it's brilliant. So I'd recommend that, definitely. Loved it.
By the way, I hope if Mandy Rowbottom is listening, she wasn't offended by. I bet this is absolutely brilliant, and I am going to read it. But I was just surprised. I don't want her to think that didn't want it. It was just, an unexpected bonus.
Exactly.
I hate those randoms. I love it. Sometimes that happens to me. Just a random one, and then you'll find this lovely beauty that you might never have otherwise.
Yes.
Absolutely, that might turn out to be the best book I've read all year. So you never know. Right, okay. Well, very, very, very sadly, we have to draw this to a close now, Louise. I mean, I think Nikki and I could probably go on chatting to you all day because we love loud Lulu. We really do. But our edits are calling and we have to get back to work. Although I'd do anything to keep away from them, wouldn't you, Nikki?
Oh, yes, at the moment, yes, definitely.
So I'm sure you're incredibly busy as well, Louise, but we thank you very much for coming on today. And everybody, Louise Swanson's latest book, End of Story, is out on the 23rd of March. And if you're also interested in reading Louise Beech's memoir, 18 Seconds, then that's out a month later on the 27th of April. 2 books out in 2 months. That's good going, Louise.
Madness, isn't
good
it?
Going.
Madness.
You're going to be a busy lady.
I know.
Yes. But it's been lovely, really lovely talking to you, Louise, really lovely. And then next week, it's going to be episode 4 of our mini-sode series with social media strategist and author Zoe Lee. And the following week, Lesley and Lauren will be chatting to Simon McLeave about TV scripts and writing for Hollywood. So do get in touch across any of our social media channels if you have any topics you'd like us to cover. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please rate and review on whatever platform you're listening on so that others can find us. So for now, it's a goodbye from Louise Swanson / Beech.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from me and goodbye from Lesley.
Bye-bye.